More than 3 years after the deadly mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, the first criminal trial is about to begin. Jury selection will start Monday for the trial of the former school resource officer Adrian Gonzales, who is facing more than 24 counts of abandoning and endangering a child. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed that day. Gonzales was one of the first officers to respond to the massacre, but according to his indictment, he failed to follow his active shooter training. Gonzales' attorney says his client feels he's innocent and argues the scene was chaotic and confusing. We have former federal prosecutor Brendan Ballou joining us here. And Brendan, I want to read a little bit of what this indictment actually alleges. I think it's really important for people to understand. It says, after hearing gunshots and after being advised of the general location of the shooter, having time to respond to the shooter, Gonzales failed to engage, distract, or delay the shooter, failed to otherwise act in a way to impede the shooter until after the shooter had entered those 2 rooms at Robb Elementary and shot at children in those rooms. It also actually says that Gonzales failed to follow and attempt to follow his active shooter training in his response. What do you think about that, and what kind of legal precedent could this set about how officers must respond in situations like this?
Well, I think you've hit exactly the core dispute that's going to happen in this trial, which is whether or not the officers were following the active shooter training and, bluntly, whether that training would have made a difference. So the statute prohibits acts or omissions that can endanger a child, put them in imminent risk of bodily injury or death. I think there's really going to be 2 disputes here. The first one, and probably the less contentious, is whether the officers' inactions actually endangered the children. Bluntly, I think some of the defense counsel may be arguing here that it was too late for the officers to do anything. But I think the deeper question, and it goes to what you were just quoting, is whether the officers were acting with what lawyers call the requisite mens rea, or mental state. Were they acting recklessly or with criminal negligence here? And in determining that, the core question is going to be whether the officers were following the instructions that they had for how to handle school shooter drills.
Yeah, and I mean, Gonzalez's defense here, that the scene was chaotic and confusing. I think really anyone looks at that and says, of course it was. Is any situation that relies on the training and composure of a school resource officer in a serious emergency ever going to be orderly? What kind of defense is that, in your view?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Any of these sorts of scenes are going to be chaotic, and Uvalde was sort of the worst of them all, that there were over 400 officers on the scene that day, and yet it took over 70 minutes for them to breach the room where the shooter was. So, you do have to wonder how much is chaos going to be an excuse here. One of the things that I think defense counsel will probably raise is that given the chaos, the other officer that's being indicted here was one of the leads of the Uvalde School District Police Force. It was his responsibility nominally to establish some sort of command and control procedure on the ground that day, which allegedly did not happen. So if you're Officer Gonzales, one of the subordinate officers here, one of the arguments that you're going to make is that there really wasn't any direction, and that at some level you were simply following orders by not going into the school.
I also wonder, police officers have a very tough job. And when you speak to people who have actually been shot at by someone who is, trying to do them harm, they'll tell you, you don't really know how you're going to react, right, until you're actually in that situation. And we see that time and again. Some people, they kind of really step up in like this superhuman way, and some don't. How does the law see that on the individual actions of an officer versus, say, what you're talking about, which is the leadership kind of comes in? You have a lot more people, and they're supposed to be overriding that desire, obviously, to not be dealing with someone shooting at you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And here it's going to be important to see if Texas law distinguishes between what an ordinary civilian might have to do and what a police officer might have to do. Ordinarily, we don't have an obligation to save other people, even if we, perhaps have a moral obligation to do so. And none of us really know how we would handle just a horrifying tragedy like that. But I think one of the key things here is that these officers had received school shooter training. And in fact, Officer Gonzales had actually helped to administer a school shooting training just a few months before. So, he perhaps better than anybody would have been equipped to understand sort of mentally what would be required in a moment like that.
Such a good point. Brendan Ballou, thank you so much.